Hey, this is Al. We're in the Arts Cafe. It's some of us, but it's really great. And this is really exciting. It's 10:30 a.m. Philadelphia time. Many people watching this are ModPo regulars. You know how a webcast goes. For those of you who are new, rookies, neophytes, this is not going to be typical because we're actually going to be talking about 2 poems instead of a whole week of poems. Yes, it'll be interactive, but it'll be a little different from the regular symposium season webcasts, which are weekly. We have a plan for this, okay? So this book, Urban Tumbleweed, is fantastic. And Harryette Mullen wrote it. And it was published by Grey Wolf Press a long time ago. And what Laynie has done is, I guess with a little help from with narrowing it down from me, we've picked 3 pages, and you all probably have printouts, and if not, Amber Rose, you can share. And they are tankas or tankas, 3 lines. And what I'm going to ask you all to do is, and we'll do it in turn, everybody gets to pick a triplet, a triad, a single tanka to talk about in any way you want. And you can, when you get to yours, you can refer to someone who's just spoken. You can talk about the adjacency of yours to another one. But mostly what we're asking you to do is just put into the record your reading of a triplet. Camara, Browne first. Pick a triplet and just say anything you want about it. Everybody, there's a lot of us, so be brief, but just put it into the record. Camara, followed by Knar.
Well, I'd love to start with the triplet, the tanka that goes with daily commuters, an extra passenger on the bus, ladybug clinging to the window, didn't need to pay a fare. I love the sort of like the turn or the surprise in the poem. Ladybug clinging to the window seems, sort of expected, but then the turn to didn't need to pay a fare. The irony of even thinking about a ladybug participating in the economy in this way makes it even more obvious, kind of the sort of harshness of paying for movement and the sort of naturalness of just going places. But I also just saying I felt really, a lot of compassion for this ladybug clinging to a window. I was just thinking of it clinging for its life. And yeah, I've also been that daily commuter looking at the bugs thinking, damn, like y'all didn't need to pay for this, but I don't think you want to be on the bus either.
Thank you so much. And it's light. It has a light. It's very serious, but it also has a light side, which we're going to be coming back to again and again. Thank you, Camara. Knar is next, followed by Jason.
So I want to look at, and this is on page 10, the kind of first triplet there. So pedestrians on neighborhood sidewalks, swerving slightly to avoid smearing a child's exuberant drawings in colored chalk.
Nice.
So I thought this was just a really wonderful and interesting moment. It reflected sort of non-spatial or non-material ways in which creation can impact flows of movement and travel. Across the selections for today, we have different forms of like fences and then, trees and things that kind of enact barriers, some of which are more porous than others. But I liked how the actual chalk drawings in this case kind of act as almost sort of a spatializing force that causes this sort of swerve, which brought to mind for me, I don't know, I have Joan Rotelick on the mind lately, but she talks about how, poetics can sort of swerve us out of a gridlock of sorts. And it seems like in this moment, that's really what's happening. People encounter this chalk and it's like, you can't quite step on the writing. Something about it, makes you want to avert it and kind of go around and have that pause and that swerve. So yeah, I really liked that passage.
Oh, that's fabulous. I love that. I'm going to ask Davy to comment on, so far of the ones chosen, on the way in which urbanism, combines with this form, this tonka form, which you think of as very precious and nature-y, and here it's being used in the service of urbanism. So if you don't mind, Davy, that would be a good meta moment.
Sure. So these tonkas, for me, do an amazing job of thinking about relationships between human and non-human that blur a line between urban and non-urban. And it made me think of the anthropologist Anna Singh and her work on arts of noticing. And that's basically thinking about noticing or attention as a way of dealing with climate catastrophe. This is a drought landscape. This is Southern California. And this is a place in which transportation is, and these are all four that were mentioned are about routines, and the first three are about routines of movement. So being a pedestrian on a sidewalk, being on a bus, thinking about cars in the freeway. I mean, the affect with which people think about transportation in Southern California is rage and fear and anger. And so to be attentive and thoughtful and draw out multimodality in what's thought of as a car landscape, to have three tonkas that folks selected, one about a bus, one about pedestrians, one about cars, in a landscape that we really only think of as a car landscape, as only a built environment, and to insist on it as multimodal, to insist on it as having complex relationships with the non-human. I mean, if the tonka is a form designed to attune our attention, and folks who are thinking about how do we deal with living with the context of climate catastrophe, one of the strategies available to us is to be super, super, super attentive as a way of figuring out how to not be in despair constantly, to refuse the terms of grief with attention. I think about these poems doing that. I really think about them as climate poems. I think about them as rigorously ecological poems, especially the ones that talk about native plants that I hope we get to talk about. But I also think about them as poems that ask for a routine of attention and that bring the tonka form into living with infrastructural violence and climate catastrophe in a very beautiful way.
Yay. Really, really fabulous. And I'm sure that what you just said will resonate as people introduce more of these tonkas. So, Amber Rose, followed by Allie.
I'm choosing the tonka at the top of page 5. Chain link fence, locked gate protect this urban garden. Fugitive fragrance of honeysuckle escapes to tempt the passing stranger.
Yeah.
These are all so good. But this one especially, like Kate was just discussing, is about control and boundaries and the sort of humorous failure of these human boundaries, a chain link fence, a locked gate, to sort of keep folks in and out, right? But then there's this fugitive fragrance. First of all, to describe a fragrance as fugitive, I think is really funny. But thinking about what cannot be touched or seen, but still escapes the borders of control. And what's especially nice about the honeysuckle is that it's a fragrance, but the temptation to the passing stranger is to grab that fragrance and make it a different sensory experience, which is the taste. So she's playing with a couple senses and how controlled boundaries sort of fail when you're thinking about how nature works.
That's so nice. Do you have a hunch as to what kind of urban garden there is? I mean, there are two general types that one might be thinking of. One is, I have my tiny little plot of land. I mean, I myself have one such thing. And, those are my tomatoes. Don't you come passing by this urban place because there's such population density and just grab a tomato. I'm going to put a fence up. And then there's the other, which Lily knows a lot about, which is a kind of collective place where it's actually membership / common, right? Sherry. And for that, the lock gate is, a lot of people really collectively work hard on this, and so we need to secure it at night. And in both cases, the escape fragrance is the thing you can't keep in. Any thoughts on what kind of garden this is, Amber Rose, and what were you thinking about? The urban garden is a special, special thing, I think.
The urban garden is a special thing because the appeal of the urban garden is folks who recognize that the city landscape removes us from not just nature, but from a sense of cultivating nature for the
Yes.
sake of our own benefit or for the sake of sharing, right?
Yeah.
But so it's sort of like the kind of folks that would have an urban garden are the kind of folks who are sort of aware of the importance of nature in urban landscape, but the chain link fence and the locked gate then sort of counteract that impulse to go closer to nature. So there's a lot of tension here. In this particular one, I think that this is like a single person who has their garden that's really robust. It's like more than 2 plants, but there's still like, even if I have 30 plants, you can't touch a leaf on not a single
Right.
one.
So do you think there's a tone here? Anybody on the part of Mullen? What's Mullen's tone, Lily, about this? Like, is she implying with this Tonka that this is a stupid ass idea?
Yeah, I think exactly. Ember is pointing to the word fugitive. Like in my reading, Mullen is implying it with a tone of maybe irony. Like we shouldn't really put such a heavy armament like around something so.
And besides, you
simple
can't
and beautiful
possibly
as- yeah.
keep the smell of the fragrance, at bay. You can't trap it. You can't
Right, like-
imprison it.
Yeah, she doesn't believe it should be there, and like she's not saying fugitive. Like she's gonna try to put it back in there. It's like she
Yeah.
wants it to escape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that tone may extend to many of these others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to turn to our pal, Allie Castleman, whom I have actually seen in Philadelphia several times because guess what? Allie is teaching an in-person course here at the University of Pennsylvania. And the other day I walked through CPCW and there was Allie holding forth. Or not holding forth, but leading a conversation.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Hi, Allie.
I was thinking about that last Tonka that Carlos Williams's nose would not be deterred by that chain link fence. Which brings me, I don't know if anyone talked about the last one on page 21. So that reads,
No, daylilies. Nope. You're on.
although they grow best in sunny places with moist but well-drained earth, daylilies are tolerant of many conditions and soils. And so this kind of popped out at me for a couple of reasons. First, we were talking a couple of minutes ago about like where to situate this work, these poems, and kind of like their relation to imagism, and the many conditions and soils just brings me immediately to mind, going back to Williams, of like the hospital walls and the broken glass. So that's the first thing. And I also love how, kind of like with that in mind, the like order and syntax here kind of introduces the flowers, the daylilies. I'm not actually sure if daylilies are flowers, are they?
They are. They flower daytimes. They close up at night and flower in the day, and they're good almost all the way through the summer.
How they kind of proceed in our imagination, the conditions and soils. So because we're talking about a city, because concrete has been mentioned, I kind of imagine the concrete and the soil kind of like almost like claymation style, like building around the flowers, which is a kind of backwards order, but really nice because it gives the flower some kind of like precedence or relative power in that kind of like grammatical construction. And the last thing I really like about how this is situated within the context of like just the excerpt we're looking at is we're talking about like a specific place here, but to say that these daylilies are tolerant of many conditions and soils, it gestures outside of this particular city and outside of this particular work. So there's a way in which that Tonka is just really like inviting and kind of like brings in just a lot beyond the page.
Thank you. Laynie Browne, the floor is yours. Say whatever you'd like to say as a way of summing up this conversation and remind us why you think this is a good addition to ModPo.
So a lot of words that we've been talking a lot about plants and people and intersections with the human and more than human world. And I feel like these poems are so playful and smart in considering plants, what we can learn from plants. So just to take for an example the poem with the jacaranda and the dandelion, the jacaranda is this majestic tree with these amazing, beautiful purple blossoms that are fragrant, but they make a mess when they fall. So it's kind of a grand and stately tree. And then the dandelion is so small, yet it's this really powerful medicinal herb. So I feel like in a way we're talking about people posturing through the plants. And also I think of these as quintessential walking poems. So Harryette writes about how being non-native to California herself, which is, she's talking about plants that are native and not native, but she's talking about herself as a transplant and walking in different neighborhoods of Los Angeles deliberately that she might not ordinarily go to with her notebook. So the poems are deliberately pedestrian poems in a famously non-pedestrian city. And so to me, there's this idea of poetry as migrant, right, which makes me think about Cecilia Vicuña. They're crossing borders, we can't contain them. And in The Fugitive Honeysuckle, which I so love that one, they're also anti-capitalist. They're kind of about personal property and collisions between various cultures, human and non-cultures, in Los Angeles. Also, this book, the poems talk to each other in a way that I so love. They're in conversation with each other in the way that we are in conversation with each other in Modpo.
I love that. Thank you. Snaps for Laynie. Great summary.